Hi, I'm Heidi Lang. I am the co-author of Whispering Pines, which I wrote with my sister, Katie Bartkowski. It was published through McElderry Books, an imprint of Simon & Schuster, and it released on September 1st of this year, 2020. It's set in a small New England town surrounded by the watchful woods, which is the kind of forest where the trees feel like they're always creeping in closer, like the waves of the hungry sea. It's a town riddled with mysterious tunnels and bottomless sinkholes, the kind of place where a student or two can go missing every year and people barely seem to notice. And for today, I thought that I would read to you from the prologue, which is set in late June. Jasmine clung to the edges of the hall. They were less likely to creak, and in this old house, she needed all the help she could get. Her brother, Jake, always forced her to be it first, just because she was the youngest. It wasn't fair, but if she complained, the others might not let her play anymore, and she loved playing hide and seek. She and Jake had been playing every night this summer with their cousin and the neighbor next door. She'd gotten pretty good at it. Even though she wasn't as fast as the others, she was definitely sneakier. So far, she'd managed to tag everyone except their neighbor Stephanie, but that was about to change. Jasmine pushed the front door open and slipped outside into the cool night air. She stood alone on the porch of her family's old colonial house, which sat right at the edge of the watchful woods. Night bled across the sky like ink, transforming the forest into tangled tree limbs and disturbing shadows. Jasmine shivered. Normally she could hear peepers, bugs, and bats, but everything had gone still tonight, like the rest of the world was waiting for her to make the first move. She stepped off the porch and walked silently toward the woods in search of Stephanie. A few feet in, and she could barely see, the dying light from the sky blotted out by tangled branches overhead. She hunched her shoulders and kept going, leaves crunching underfoot no matter how carefully she tried to walk. Long minutes passed with no sign of Stephanie. Jasmine glanced over her shoulder. She couldn't see the house anymore. She hesitated, then noticed something gleaming white just ahead, a spot of brightness in all the gloom. Jasmine eased her way closer, squinting, until she made out Stephanie's long blonde hair. "Got you," she thought triumphantly. Stephanie didn't move, even though she had to have heard Jasmine coming. Jasmine paused a few feet away, unease prickling up and down her back. She clicked the flashlight on like a spotlight, illuminating Stephanie bent forward, her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking like she was crying. "Stephanie? Are you—" Stephanie spun, one pale, grasping hand catching Jasmine by the wrist, another latching around her upper arm, yanking her close so fast Jasmine didn't have time to resist. Her fingers were still clenched around the flashlight, its beam bathing Stephanie's face, and the numbness of horror spilled through her. Jasmine barely felt Stephanie's too tight grip, or the wet from the grass seeping through her shoes, or anything. She couldn't feel anything. Stephanie's mouth moved, open and shut, almost like she was gnawing on an invisible bone. And her eyes, oh, her eyes. Where her eyes should have been, there was nothing. Nothing but two deep pits full of night. Jasmine made a low animal sound deep in her throat. She wanted to scream, but her voice had shriveled away to nothing. Stephanie leaned in closer, and now Jasmine could see how filthy her face was, streaked with mud and crisscrossed with angry red welts, like she'd been running headlong through the branches. "Eyes," Stephanie rasped, right beside Jasmine's ear. "He said I have lovely eyes." She released Jasmine as abruptly as she caught her, and Jasmine scrambled away, slipping in the damp grass. She knew she should stay, should somehow help Stephanie, but fear pulled Jasmine sprinting back to the safety of the house. The front door stood wide open, but Jasmine barely noticed as she raced through it, running down the hall and into the dining room, and then stopped. Her brother cowered under the table, his knees drawn to his chest. He had his cell phone out, the light of the screen turning his face a pallid, sinister blue, his eyes dark pockets of shadow. "Jake?" He looked up, and Jasmine's flashlight reflected off the whites of his eyes. She wanted to sob in relief. For a second, she'd been picturing Jake with empty eye sockets, just like Stephanie, and she'd been so afraid. "Shh," Jake hissed. "There's something in the house." "What?" Fear came back, sharp and throbbing. "We thought it was you, but it..." His voice choked off in a sob. "It went after Teresa." "What did?" Jasmine demanded. "I don't know. It had no eyes, Jazz. It had so many teeth, but no eyes." No eyes. Like Stephanie. This was a nightmare. This wasn't real. Jasmine couldn't believe any of this was happening. But then she heard screams. Teresa's screams. They seemed to echo all through the house, high and shrill and terrified, before stopping suddenly, as if someone had just turned the sound off. Jasmine clicked off her flashlight, listening hard. Her heart beat too loud in her ears, her breath rasping, but beneath that she thought she heard the creaking of footsteps. Behind her? Above her? It was too hard to tell in this old, shifting house. "I'm trying to call Mom, but it's not going through." Jake's whisper was too loud. Jasmine felt like he was shouting, and his phone screen was so bright. The footsteps grew louder. Jasmine whimpered, "Close the screen, Jake. I need to reach Mom. We need to hide." She could hear something at the other end of the hall, moving toward them. Closer. "Jake!" she sobbed. He looked up. "You go, Jazz. Go hide. And don't come out, no matter what you hear." Jasmine shook her head. "Go!" He punched at the phone again, and she knew he wouldn't leave this room. So she went. She couldn't stop crying. Silent little gasps. But somehow she made it to the kitchen. She opened the cabinet doors below the sink, folded herself against the cold pipe, and pulled the doors shut. Outside, all was silent. And then the screams began again. Jake's screams this time. Jasmine pressed her face into her knees and wept, and tried not to listen as they went on, and then abruptly stopped. In the sudden silence, Jasmine could hear footsteps creaking across the old wooden floor, stopping only a few feet in front of her hiding place. She tried to keep her breathing shallow, quiet, the scent of mold and bleach and that awful fake orange cleaner filling her nostrils. Her knees were crammed practically to her face, the cold pipe of the sink pressing into her back. Would it think to look under here? Jasmine was small for her age and flexible. Most other 10-year-olds wouldn't be able to fit. "I know you're in here," the thing said. Blood roared in Jasmine's ears, and she bit down on her fist to keep from gasping. She squeezed her eyes shut and waited, counting slowly until the noise in her ears faded. Nothing happened. She opened her eyes, blinking in the dim light filtering through the cabinet doors. It must have been bluffing. Creak! Footsteps somewhere else in the house, the sound of a door opening and closing. Jasmine relaxed, her foot bumping a bottle. The cabinet doors flew open. Jasmine couldn't scream, her throat one tight knot. "Hello, little girl." The monster smiled, the skin of its face stretching around all those teeth like a badly made mask. "What lovely eyes you have." And as it reached for her, Jasmine found she could scream, after all. Chapter 1 takes place 3 months after that prologue, with the arrival in town of new girl, Ray Carter, who is going to work together with character Caden Price and hopefully solve the mystery of the serial eye snatcher. If you want to find out more, this book is in stores everywhere now. Thank you so much for listening.